Hey, this is Zen Zenith just sneaking in to say check out the House Show with Zen Zenith. That's me on Dragon Wagon Radio. The House Show is a live concert series featuring stripped-down performances and interviews with amazing singer-songwriters. We do the whole thing in front of a real live audience at a real live house and package the whole thing up into a podcast for you to experience in the ease of your home or car. Real intimate performances, real intimate conversations with great people. Check it out at thehouseshowshow.com or on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever else good podcasts are found. We'll see you there.
It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Hello, Quillers. What you can't see is that during that little jig, during that little intro music, I do a little dance here in the studio because it's such a groovy little tune. And we can thank Mr. Jake Lloyd. He is an actor, writer, award-winning filmmaker, and also the founder of Dragon Wagon Radio. He is the myth, the man, the legend, and he's here with us in the studio for this episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. Hello, Jake.
Hi, thank you so much for giving me a microphone again. I was afraid after the last time you were going to be like, listen, we went like 2 hours. I was too much. We got to give him like the playoff music and get rid of him.
The hook. Get the hook.
Well, I am here for every episode of Don't Quill the Messenger, of course, because I produce the show.
The man behind the magic.
Yeah, I feel like today it would be nice. You just had a great trip to the Shakespeare, darn it, I'm going to get this. It's the name of the city, Ashland, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. There we go.
Can you put it in the form of a question, sir? Because you butchered it.
What is the Oregon Shakespeare Festival?
We were at the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Ashland Summer Seminar.
All right. See, I wasn't going to get that. That's a lot of words.
Yes, and that was obviously in Ashland, Oregon. We spent an entire week up there with some of the top scholars from the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, as well as 40 to 50 participants who sat in on presentations and lectures throughout the week.
Interesting.
Mostly focused on the 3 plays in production at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival this season, which included As You Like It, All's Well That Ends Well, and Macbeth.
Of course. Delightful. And any standouts from your week there?
Yes.
Yeah. Nothing you can share.
Well, some of the standouts from the presentations included some of the guests that we've had here in other episodes of Don't Quill the Messenger, including Brian Wildenthal, who's been on a couple of different times.
Right.
Bonner Cutting, who
I love Bonner.
Is always a pleasure and such a joy. She has such interesting information. We're going to have her back on a future episode.
Right, yeah, we have to get her in studio here.
Ooh, she's from Texas. That might not be easy to do.
Well, listen, if we got Hank Whittemore here, we'll figure out a way to get Bonner Miller Cutting here.
Well, I think it's a good idea. And of course, Roger Strittmatter, who also has been on the program, and Earl Showerman.
Right, right.
So some of the top names, the top celebrities, some people that our listeners, our Quillers, have heard on the program before.
Awesome.
We're all there and giving presentations, and then we spent. It was Shakespeare Geek Week. That's what I call it.
That's great.
Yeah, because we were there. We would start at like 8:30 in the morning, go until 5:30 in the afternoon, take a quick dinner break, and then have to be at the theater by 7:30 for an 8 o'clock curtain.
Wow.
Get out of there, after 10.
That's a long day.
And do it again.
That's a lot of Shakespeare.
Yeah, it was.
That is a whole lot of shaking.
It was all
a wide variety of Spears.
A whole lot of Shakespeare going on.
Right. Well, I'm glad to have you back in town. Thanks for inviting me on, because I thought it would be a good time. We're at episode, I believe this is 15, maybe 16, somewhere in that range. I thought it would be a good time to sort of see what the people are saying and sort of,
You've been sharing with me throughout the months some of the feedback that we've received from some of our listeners, both good and bad. And I think it's a great idea for us to talk about that today and get to the bottom of it and give some responses to what we've been receiving so far.
Yeah, so we do have via the Dragon Wagon radio website, which also is a direct link from don'tquillthepodcast.com. You can go ahead and click the top right corner and click contact. And there's a little form you could fill out, and you could send us an email that way. If you're ever listening to the show and you say, hey, I have an opinion about that, or hey, I have a question about that, please, I urge you to go and use that form. It is the best way to get something right to us, right into the inbox. And way back when the show started, we got an email from a woman named Elena. I'm going to butcher this. Notariani. Elena Notariani. She says, hi, Stephen. A very big thank you for me in the UK for your wonderful series of podcasts. I find myself totally fascinated and engrossed by the discussions you host and look forward to each new episode. Meanwhile, I have to re-listen to previous episodes over and over again to get my fix. I hope your series continues for a very long time. It seems we can only begin to understand how great the plays are by setting them in the context of De Vere as the true author. I congratulate you on your work. And if you ever put one of your productions on the internet, please let us know. Perhaps you might bring a production to Edinburgh Festival one year. That would be something. All the best, Elena.
Wow. Well, thank you, Elena. She's awesome. And my head has just exploded outside the room.
Well,
that's a fantastic email. I'm sure they're not all like that.
They're not all like that, but I do find it interesting how clear the listeners lean for the most part. It's always very obvious. And I'm going to say this right at the top of the show. Anything that I say throughout the course of our conversation here is the opinion of me, Jake Lloyd, and the opinion of me only. It is not the opinion of the show or the fantastic organization, the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship that presents the show. These are all my opinions. I don't know whether I'm an Oxfordian. I surely don't. I am brand new to this mystery. I sure as heck know that the information that I've been given tells me that the likelihood of the man from Stratford is very slim to none. I mean, it's for me, I think
it's much easier. It's true. And you remember the episode we had with John Shahan was on from the Shakespeare Authorship Coalition.
Yes.
And John spelled it out very clearly, and I think it's very true. It's much easier to be an authorship skeptic than it is to be an Oxfordian.
Yes.
It's very easy to look at the scenario, the evidence, and go, something is not right here.
Exactly.
And it takes a lot more study and a lot more listening and research and delving in to then discover who you believe the true author is.
Sure. And I think it is and should be a two-step process. I think
it's it could be according to Hank Whittemore, it could be a 100-step process.
Sure.
Right?
I guess what I mean is, and like Strahan was speaking of, it's, accepting the reasonable doubt. I am a man of science. I am not very much a man of faith. I believe things that make sense to me, and that's my viewpoint on the world. That's how I approach every day of life. And in producing, this show, which by the way was presented to me by a former guest of the show and fantastic Julie Sandys Bianchi, on behalf of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. When the show was presented to me as something to do as part of Dragon Wagon, I knew the work of Shakespeare that I knew, which is not vast. And I did not even know there was a mystery. Did not even know that there was a, whatever you want to call it, a question.
Many people, that is true for so many people.
Right. And so I have to reiterate, I'm coming to this as somebody who's not an academic. I will have you know that I am a college dropout because I'm an artist. I studied the human condition.
Shame on you.
Shame on me.
You lousy artist.
You know what? I dove right into, and I did study acting privately throughout my adulthood. But with that said, I'm a scholar of the human condition, and that's the best way that I can place it as a writer, as somebody who has really analyzed what humanity is, how humanity works, how people work, and how they interact from one another. I consider myself a pretty adept at understanding why people are the way they are.
I think that's an advantage. I think that's the key. It's the people who haven't ever heard of the Shakespeare authorship question and people who don't know who Edward de Vere is, who haven't been indoctrinated in this, who I think have the most objective viewpoint and have the most open mind. They don't have a bias established in one direction or the other. And I think the biggest problem that we receive from this is those people who have been completely biased
Right.
in the direction of the man from Stratford, in the what I like to call the Stratfordian myth.
Sure.
And there are quite a number of people who have an interest in, again,
Right.
pointing out John Shan. We talk about the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. You want to talk about
That so
extreme financial
that,
interest.
Yeah, I told you that after recording that episode, I could not rack my brain around that all night long. I kept thinking like, this is so obvious, and I think I gave you the association of, oh, this is like Roswell, New Mexico, or this is like Loch Ness. I was like, and it seems to me like, yeah, people in Loch Ness want you to think that there could be a monster in there.
My wife will tell you, in fact, just the other day, she said, you talk about me on your program a lot. Well, you're a big part of my life, honey.
It's a sign of love, right?
But
I would be worried if you didn't. That's
here's
my
a
concern.
fact. We've been together 8 years, and we'll celebrate our 6th wedding anniversary next month.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
And in that time, she has, of course, been exposed to this a lot.
Sure.
But it wasn't until she heard that episode with John Shahan and
Right.
she went to the website for the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt, read it, signed it,
I did the same exact thing.
and then truly invested in
Right.
this premise of Oxford. And then it was watching the YouTube video, which any of our listeners can go and find. You
Right.
can find a YouTube video by Tom Renier presenting to Gable Stage in Florida. So a 90-minute presentation
Wow.
on the entire SAQ and Oxford.
Okay.
And she watched that and went, I'm convinced.
Wow. And again, I don't know that I'm at that stage because honestly, I just don't think I have all of the information. I'm also self-aware enough to know that I am not a history buff. I am not the type of person who, when I hear you on this show many times, just rattling off facts of the life of Oxford or other members of that era. That's, I was never good at that stuff in school. I have a terrible memory for it. And so when you rattle that stuff off, it's harder for me to paint a real photo of that in my head, to be like, oh, okay, I can understand that. But then when you talk about the life and the person, that's when I go, oh yeah, if this person had this relationship with this other person, this is how he would feel.
I have nothing on Bonner Miller Cutting. She
wills.
can't, the dates
Right.
of people's lives, the dates of activities and things. Just in this seminar that we were in Ashland, everybody just turns to Bonner. What was the date of that, Bonner? Boom, 1592, 1586,
Right.
1603. Like she just like bing, 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 bing.
Right.
Sometimes she even give you the exact month of the year.
Sure.
Sometimes even the exact day that something happened, or that a momentous occurrence that is pertinent to this.
Right.
That kind of thing's a little bit beyond me.
Sure.
I'm not so good at that.
But it's because of those things that I can't yet call myself an Oxfordian, because I don't think that I have enough information to cook. Because I also don't know anything about some of the other potential candidates. I don't know anything about Marlowe or Francis Bacon or these other people, these names that come up often when this question arises. So I don't think it's not one of those things. I hear it and I go, yeah, that sounds like it totally could be him. And in fact, there are many times I go, oh, that sounds like it's definitely him. But I don't, well,
that's the point of the program,
exactly.
Right, Jake? And that's why we're here. And
it's much easier to, I think, understand without it's not, I'm not taking a leap here. I'm not, as someone who's new to this, I'm not saying like, no, you know what? I'm putting all my faith in this thing that sounds like it maybe isn't true, but because it's faith. No, it's not a leap. This dude didn't write those things. Like the logic to me is so skewed, which is why, and I want to bring this up because
I was going to say, because some people do subscribe to it like a religious faith, and they get angry.
And so that's a big thing. And so again, I'm the one that is actively posting on our Instagram and our Twitter at Don't Quill the Pod. And so I'm the one that immediately sees the responses. And I thought this was just interesting because it's so weird for me, somebody who is, like I said, an actor and a writer, some of the background in stand-up comedy. I did stand-up for over a decade. I'm sensitive to the way people act and react to things. And I thought this was interesting. And listen, we're a transparent show here. We're just being honest. This is what this show's about, the conversation. A Twitter user with the name @ClearShakes is their Twitter handle. And when asked, hey, do you guys have any questions? Because we want to do a little talk back. The immediate response is, of course, yes, I have a question. When did your brain break? and so it's interesting. So this is a 2-part question.
I'm so glad that you're the filter, because I have a thinner skin than you. Because I'm an artist too.
Sure.
And sometimes I'm a delicate flower, and I'm so glad that you filter through these things, and I don't have to see and read them all. And you just share like the most outlandish or the funnest ones with me.
But you know what?
That's a really good. When did my brain break?
And so it's a 2-part question. One is when did your brain break, Steve? Do you know? Do you have any idea? Something like college?
No, but I'm so thankful for the super glue that is the facts of this situation that holds it all back together.
Sure. All right. So my point being in bringing this up is, and this is going to be me as the guy in the middle at this point, addressing both sides of this scenario.
All right.
I saw this and I took offense to it. And I'm not even, listen, I'm producing this show that's about asking questions. That's about interesting. And, this show is an entertainment show. Hopefully we are providing people with an insight into something even more than that.
Something to keep them from killing their fellow drivers on the freeway during traffic.
And so that's my thing is like a response to something like this. The way that I see this is a total stranger told me, a total stranger, that the primary thing that makes me a human above the other animals of this earth is not working, is broken. And I immediately think like, it's kind of surprising to me. I think a part of it, you just said that people treat it like religion, is because I think the passion for the work sometimes clouds people's ability to maybe understand it. And that is, again, as a man who personally, and I don't know how you, Stephen, feel or what your beliefs are or people of the listeners, and I'm not a man of religion of any sort. And I understand some of the things that people hold on to within the Bible that are incredible, that I say like, no, this is an incredible story that is something that we should learn from and we should grow from. I can understand the importance of the Bible. I can understand the importance of a religion while simultaneously thinking to myself personally, well, this isn't real with people. This didn't happen. You didn't know, like, and I feel like people have that connection to Shakespeare and the work of Shakespeare. So much so that this is the response. This is the response.
The great irony is, if you look at it truthfully, and you connect this to Elizabethan history, if you look at it, the difference between Stratfordianism and Oxfordianism could be in many ways compared to the difference between Protestantism and Catholicism that was going on during the Elizabethan age, right?
And tell me about that. I'm not
so here you have people who they love the same God, they read the same Bible, right, but they want to practice that faith in two different ways, and they have two different belief systems because of that. And one of the things that I think that happens with a lot of Stratfordians is they forget to realize that Oxfordians love the work just as much as they do. That's why we care so much about getting to the truth.
Very true.
And I think that if we could all remember that, is that what does bind us all together is a communal love for the art itself. I think that would help diffuse some of the vitriol, as you say.
Absolutely.
We commonly experience.
And also, I think that like celebrating the work at times is so much more important than celebrating the man. The poets of today, the playwrights of today, there's plenty of filmmakers and comedians and incredible talents who we are now realizing not the greatest of people.
You think?
And like as a former stand-up comedian, a stand-up comedian that is very well known, who was a massive impact on me and my childhood and my life and the path I would take.
You're not going to say it.
I'm not going to say it, but regardless, we all know that person is, I know that we generally keep a clean show here, but that person is an absolute asshole. And so but here's the thing is the work.
He doesn't have two initials.
Maybe. The work is still the work to me. And it's almost like, to be honest with you, it doesn't matter who the man is for me. And I know that that's my point of view, but some people cannot separate that. That's really seeing that.
And I think that is a part of it as well, because through the Stratfordian mythology, because there is so little actually known about the man from Stratford,
right,
it allows people to create an image that it basically create a Shakespeare in their own image.
Right.
As opposed to when you look at the life of Oxford, when you look at how Edward de Vere lived his life, you look at the terrible mistakes that he made, the
Sure.
people that he damaged in
Right.
horrible ways.
Right.
If you look at the way he was damaged through
Sure.
his life, through the things that happened to him, and how these things play out through the plays,
Sure.
through the poetry, I think that becomes the big difference for...
So wait, are you saying that maybe some people don't like the idea that these works are maybe created by a man who is at some times painted in less than a kind light?
I think there are a lot of layers to that.
Sure.
I think there are people who want to believe because it makes them feel better about their own abilities or their own potential. They want to believe that this came from nothing
Right. Sure.
because then everyone can be something.
And not for nothing, my response to that is like, there are plenty of people in the world who we hold in very high regard within the arts and within science who came from incredible, humble beginnings.
Yes.
It's this, that sentiment doesn't die if the man from Stratford didn't write these works. It's not like you can't believe that and have inspiration. I understand that maybe like if you're very attached to this guy and this is the inspiration for that thought in you, that from humble beginnings, you know, then I could understand why you would have
The
a gut
great
reaction
beauty
to
of
it.
that, though, is that in all of those cases, in 99% of the cases that you could mention, like I could think of, you know, a
Right.
gazillion in my brain right now, we have a record of how they came from humble beginnings
Right.
and worked their way up to where
Sure.
they eventually landed.
Right.
With this cat, we don't have
No.
that.
What I have a question for you. Do the math on me. How many years ago are we talking about? How many years ago are we talking about the life of the man from Stratford?
Approximately 450 years.
Okay. How many things from 400 years ago do we still have today that haven't been challenged by science? Like the point I'm trying to make here uneloquently is, for me, it's not a leap to think that something from that long ago we don't know. Like for me, it's very easy to go, oh yeah, no. How would we know that?
When we were in Ashland, one of the local reporters for the Ashland Daily Tidings
Right.
came to one of our presentations,
Mhm.
and then she interviewed me and she interviewed Earl.
Right.
And we were very thrilled that we landed on the front page of
Great.
the daily newspaper.
Fantastic.
And she was like yourself, completely she's brand new
Right.
to the whole thing. And one of the things that she and I talked about was that idea of genius
Right.
and what kind of training genius requires.
Sure.
And the analogy I used was I referred to Mozart.
Sure.
I think Mozart and Shakespeare are equitable
Right.
in that sense. And, you know, imagine if Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart had not been born the son of a music teacher.
Right. Right.
If he had been, and I used this when I said, what if he had been born the son of a butcher?
Sure.
Then he probably would have become the greatest butcher of all time.
Right.
But
right.
he would not have become a
Right.
great composer because he would not have been exposed in any way whatsoever
this is
to music composition.
This is nature versus nurture, essentially.
Exactly
Yeah.
right. If he had been born to a wood chopper in Siberia,
Right.
he would not have become one of the greatest composers of all time.
Right.
And I think that's a crucial thing that rational people can
Right.
look at and go, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
It's irrational to think that genius placed in the hands of a butcher is
Right.
going to become the greatest playwright of all
Right.
time. Now, John Shakespeare, William's father,
Okay.
was a glove maker.
Okay.
So close to a butcher. I mean, he was, you know, skinning animals.
He was
to
using
make products.
using his hands, yes, in a trade with animals. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that's why I
Him
kind
and the butcher hung out with each other. Yeah. When the butcher was done, he threw him some leather.
Probably they worked hand in hand.
Hey,
pardon the pun.
I see what you did there.
Gloves, get it?
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was my point, right?
Right.
If Edward de Vere
Sure.
had been born the son of a glove maker, he would not have become the greatest playwright of all time.
Sure. Yeah, right. Understand. And I think that's part of it too. Is you kept saying rational people, and I think that's also something that's very jarring to me.
What do I know? My brain is broken.
Sure. Okay, but let's talk about like a comment like this on Twitter, which to me is so bizarre because I feel like the people that are very passionate about this tend to be academics, right? There is a specific type that they all speak the same language. And it is a language that sometimes I have to like lean in my head, go, okay, yeah, no, okay, yeah, they said that. Okay, yeah, okay, I'm following this. Now, and I say this, I'm an honest person. You know me, I don't candy coat things. I would not be surprised if some of these academic types are the same type of people whose passions sometimes disallow them to have basic social skills. And I don't wonder if it's a communication problem. There's this one thread, and I'm not going to say the names of these two people because I don't want to even open this can of worms in case any of them listen. I posted something from the...
Well, isn't that the beauty? If they're responding, they're listening.
Well, no, because it might have been just a simple response to a tweet.
Oh, that's okay.
And because sometimes if I tweet and I use like the hashtag Shakespeare authorship question, Shakespeare authorship.
Sure.
And these two people, based on something that I had retweeted, or it was an article, I should have pulled it up. I apologize for not having the full data here, but the sentiment of the article was...
You call yourself an engineer.
I know. The sentiment was by... saying we're not sure who the author is, it doesn't make us not love the plays, which is pretty much what you said earlier. That was, and I like retweeted that and said like, man, if we could put one message out there, this is the message. Like, don't quote messenger. This is what we want. This is the overarching theme here is that we love these works, and it's interesting and fun and could be insightful to the works to find the truth behind said works. And these two people both tacked on, and by the second tweet, I could not follow either one of them. Because they're just throwing at each other without ever really engaging with what the last person said. They're just throwing out a fact at one another. They're throwing out and this, and what about this, and what about
they
this?
often resort to ad hominem attacks.
And
because they can't make a point, because they can't prove against a point or a fact. And so what do? They go to the lowest common denominator and they just attack.
But the irony of this, of course, is that neither one of them were Oxfordian. Neither one of them agreed with you specifically or the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. I believe one, I can't remember, they might have been a pro Francis Bacon and wrote a book and were touting a book, and the other person was a Stratfordian. And it was just, to me, it was just like, these people don't seem... and I know this was, they were on Twitter, so maybe it was. They don't seem like human beings engaging in a conversation. They seem like two Russian bots. That one was programmed to respond to anything anti-Stratfordian, one was programmed to respond to anything anti-Marlovian or Bacon.
This is
or
my
whoever.
go-to. This is my go-to.
And
this is my go-to.
And the reason why my brain broke, there you go. There, I figured out when it was at Clear Shakes. It was watching this thread. Was like nobody said that, and this is probably heavy and serious, and I apologize if this is going on a dark term. Like, nobody said the Holocaust didn't happen. You know what I mean? Like we're like really, we're like true life is really truly at stake by, it's like no one's saying the moon landing didn't happen.
But authorship doubters are often compared
exactly.
to
And that's
Holocaust deniers, flat earthers.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
We get that one.
That's what I'm trying to get at. And it's like when at Clear Shake says, I have a question, when did your brain break? Like, I'm not, hey, the earth is round and climate change is very real, and our president is an asshole, and we need to get these kids out of cages. And also, what do I say on the t-shirt? Frankenstein is not the monster. He's the friggin' scientist. Okay. Like we agree on all of these other things. It's not like by doubting the authorship, we're some sort of weird fringe member of society.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, Jake, because just recently we lost one of the great legal minds of American history, Justice John Paul Stevens. Okay. And Justice Stevens, while he was alive for many decades, was a professed Oxfordian. In fact, he was the Oxfordian of the Year from 2009.
Interesting.
An award that he received open-armed from our organization.
And publicly.
Yes, absolutely. So much so that at his funeral services, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg delivered the eulogy, she was very careful, because jurists are very careful with the way they use
selected
their
language.
words. Yes.
Sure.
She was very careful to say that Justice Stevens was a lover of the writings of the man known as Shakespeare.
Wow.
I'm paraphrasing.
Sure.
That prompted a writer for New Yorker magazine to do a story about Justice Stevens' dissenting opinion
Right.
on this issue.
Right.
And in retort, a man that many Stratfordians and Oxfordians know all too well, Mr. James Shapiro. I refuse to call him Professor James Shapiro, although he does profess many things. He wrote this response basically attacking a dead man who is in his grave and cannot respond and cannot debate. And that's a common tactic of Stratfordians. And what did he do? He accused Justice Stevens of being a conspiracy theorist.
Right.
See, that's those kinds of names they give us, those misnomers.
And that's true
because he could not truly engage the man in qualified debate,
right, or conversation, even like everything. I feel like debate gets thrown around there a lot, where it's like I think even the word debate can be problematic because debate turns the academics into debaters versus conversers, which I think is way more important. But yes, I apologize. Continue.
Well, so he attacks the dead first of all.
Sure.
Which he would not do, which he then says, I didn't want to do any of this publicly while he was alive. Why? Justice Stevens was willing to do it publicly while he was alive.
Sure.
You were afraid of the man.
That's
basically what it comes down to.
That's the time to talk with people that you disagree with, is when they're
Shapiro
alive.
was afraid of the man because he knew that Justice Stevens had a far greater intellect than his own.
Sure.
And he knew that Justice Stevens, who spent a lifetime as a jurist, objectively evaluating evidence, had a much clearer standing, and a much stronger platform to speak from, than Shapiro, who has made a career out of publishing books about the Stratford mythology.
Right. Yeah, it's really fascinating, and I do think a lot of it does. The equation to the religious aspect of it, where it's like this is a thing that people subscribe to so passionately. That it's a blockade, it's an unwillingness sometimes.
Methinks the lady doth protest too much.
If you believe in science, then you have to find the be all end all of any given a fact. Science is the challenging of facts, even after we all decide that it's a fact.
Absolutely, right? And almost everything we know about science began as theory.
And exactly. And I heard once somebody say like, well, the science was wrong on this at once. I was like, no. Science is never wrong, because science isn't a person. Science is a practice. A practice cannot be wrong, because the act of, practicing science is figuring out what's right. And yes, at times there are stages to get to that. So to say like, oh, the science was wrong once, I feel like that's a popular argument for people who are
when I used to teach classes for homeschool students and charter school students, I taught a class called The Science of Shakespeare. And I covered the 10 major sciences that you could find within the works of Shakespeare. And in many of those sciences throughout the canon, in fact, I believe that there are indicators of the dates of certain plays in some of the way that the scientific theory changes. You can see it. You can see the author coming to a greater understanding of science through the works. If you follow astronomy, for instance,
like chronologically, meaning like advances in science made the author understand like, that thing I did earlier was not right, and this is.
You can watch the transition from a geocentric belief system to a heliocentric belief system, for instance, which PS was happening during the time, right? And so whoever wrote these plays, had their thumb on it, was exposed to the greatest minds, the lecturers, the writings of the time of people like Bruno and Brahe. Brahe might have been a little after, but what I'm getting at is you can see the shift in understanding of the universe just in the astronomical references in the plays, for instance.
Right. So here's another email that we got from a gentleman named Doug James, who considers himself a curious septuagenarian curmudgeon.
I love his honesty.
He says, "Dear
Way to go,
Stephen,
Doug.
interested in your podcast, but will lose interest quickly if both sides of the story are not told. Answering questions like, why were the folios credited to Shakespeare? And then in parentheticals, friends who knew him commissioned the printing. Why was a grave honoring Shakespeare placed inside a Stratford church with a statue of a person said to be Shakespeare near it? Why do so many scholars believe the antithesis of your theories? I have no fixed opinion concerning Shakespeare for the same reasons that you give. There is so little known about the man himself. This could also be said about Oxford. The two-sided conversation would be most welcome. You do not make pancakes by only cooking one side."
No, that'd be kind of gross, actually.
That would be, I mean, when I was young and didn't know how to make pancakes, I actually did make a couple pancakes,
Doug,
but I'm getting sick.
I can answer one of those.
Sure. Which one?
The reason why the folio is credited to Shakespeare is because P.S. Shakespeare wrote the folio. It just
Sure.
wasn't William Shakespeare of Stratford.
Maybe that's what he means? No, I guess that doesn't make sense. The folio itself is credited to the author of the folios.
Of course.
Which is Shakespeare.
Of course. And that was the pseudonym used
yeah.
by Edward de Vere.
And that's another thing that we talked a little bit about when we did the episode with me and Alexandra Hoy earlier on in our series here, where when I discovered this question, in my mind, I picture like, oh, okay, so there's a guy in the wings who's really writing it and handing it to this other guy who's like, hey, go say that your name is my name, Shakespeare, and it's a different person. Like there's like it's Milli Vanilli. All of a sudden, someone's behind the curtain.
It's a code name.
Right. Exactly.
It's technically a code name, just like Mark Twain.
Yes. Yeah. And we've mentioned that on the show many times.
Absolutely.
Like, Mark Twain's the best example.
And the willow tree
right.
was known to be the tree of poets.
Sure.
The laurel receives a lot of credit because Apollo's laurel.
Okay.
But it was actually the willow. For instance, it's branches of the willow that are taken into Hades.
Right.
By now the poet's name.
Sure. Where's Paul for this one?
Wait. Where's the misunderstood guy on this one? Anyway, the willow and a willy, and Hank mentioned this in one of the episodes we had with Hank. The willow and willy was a slang term for a poet.
Right.
Right. He's a willy.
Right.
He's a willy guy.
Right. Yeah.
Today's day and age, we might use willy in a whole different context.
Absolutely.
And
we do.
But we have to
yes.
remember
right.
that we're talking 16th century.
Sure.
And then obviously the easy one is the Shakespeare as Minerva, which is also Pallas Athena.
Right.
And goddess of the arts and poetry.
Right.
And always depicted holding a spear and known for shaking her spear.
Sure.
Plus, our guy was known as a champion jouster and was nicknamed a spear shaker.
Right.
Now, there are some people who theorize that was also another entendre underneath that was a way of poking fun at him because he was bisexual and he shook his spear at other men.
Right. Okay.
And that's not a far-fetched theory when we look at his life and some of the details of his life.
Of Oxford's life,
Especially since we do know that he was more antique Roman than he was a Dane, as Horatio says in Hamlet. And remember, in Roman times, the ideology, and the Greeks as well, as long as you were pitching and not catching...
Right.
You were still masculine. You were still the masculine member of a relationship of that nature. Mm-hmm. I'm a theater guy. I've had homosexual friends all my life since I was in my very first play at the age of 9 years old.
Right.
And they will commonly refer to themselves as tops and bottoms. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he was a top.
Sure.
Apparently.
Sure.
And that's not crazy. That's not far-fetched. So, he also was very keen on self-satirization.
Right.
And that is evident in many of the plays. In fact, there's a lot in the plays, as we've talked about on many episodes, that are confessional in many ways.
Right.
Where he demonstrates his contrition for the really bad mistakes or the things that he did to others in his life.
Which, as a writer, that is a cathartic tool if there ever was one.
You think?
I mean, it is it's essentially taking my regret and my guilt and turning it into art for others. And it's almost the best apology I feel like one could give. It's like, hey,
pseudonyms are witty.
Me.
They're
Right.
witty. They tell a story. Obviously Samuel Clemens chose Mark Twain for a reason. There are a lot of other pseudonymous writers. Stephen King wrote under several pseudonyms. Some of the bigger, most famous ones, George Orwell was not christened George Orwell.
Sure.
And Lewis Carroll was not christened Lewis Carroll. The list could go on and on and on.
Yeah, of course. Pseudonyms are not rare in the arts.
And they certainly were not rare at a time when censorship was totalitarian.
Right.
And that's another thing I think a lot of people don't understand. And that's the episode that I want to have Bonner come on and talk about is
that would be great.
How many of the writers of the time were tortured, maimed, beheaded because
of the life of a writer within that era. Right.
People want to talk about McCarthyism and the blacklist of that day and age and Hollywood. Nothing on Elizabethan England where you had
would lose a head.
a sovereign power who literally had the life of every one of her subjects in the palm of her hand at the drop of an eyelash.
Right.
Off with your head.
Let's go to another email here.
Yeah.
We've gotten something from Judy Lewis, who writes, really enjoying the podcast. Been torturing my husband with tales of Edward de Vere since the 1980s. So I was very surprised to hear him slyly listening to this podcast. Don't know how he found it, but I've been listening rapidly for 2 weeks, binge listening to catch up, and sadly running out of podcasts too quickly. Especially enjoyed the Greek podcast and Roger Strittmatter's last appearance. Can you say appearance on a podcast? Visit? ? Thank you. Definitely wanting more. Judy Lewis.
Well, thank you, Judy. And I'm so glad your husband is a closet listener.
That's right. I'm also, Judy, hopefully you were listening to this. I would love if you found out how he discovered us and let us know. That is something that's
better yet. Let everyone know
that too. But I mean, that's useful to us.
And while you're at it, give us a rate and a review, if you would, from your favorite podcast provider.
Absolutely. Here's another question that we got in. This one sent from someone named Kara, I'm not sure. Hi, I have a question about something that was mentioned recently on a Don't Cool the Messenger. It was mentioned somewhat offhandedly in a quick sort of exchange aside between the host and guest that Oxford was friends with an astronomer. The astronomer was not named, and they moved on to a different topic. I would have loved to know the name of the astronomer associated with Oxford, if possible. Thanks for the wonderful podcast. I've learned so much.
I'm going to, most likely, we must have been talking about John Dee. And I'm not sure exactly which episode she was tuning into where we didn't clarify that. But most likely it was John Dee, not only an astronomer, but an alchemist and an astrologer to the Queen, by the way.
Interesting.
Yeah. And most likely the model for characters like Prospero.
Right.
Prospero, of course, the big magician. When I teach kids, I always tell them that Prospero is the great grandfather of Gandalf.
Right.
That kind of helps give them
the OG. Yeah, the OG Gandalf.
Yeah, it gives
That's
them
what a
some
nerd
context.
like me needs. I need pop culture references within the last 30 years, please. I'll take.
And Tolkien, not unlike Shaw, had this sort of love-hate relationship with Shakespeare. And I think it's because both of those men did not want to admit how much their works were influenced by Shakespeare. They wanted to take full credit on their own for coming up with it all. But truthfully, they steal it. Come on, the Ents, when Burnham one comes to Dunsinane.
Right.
So, what did Tolkien do? He said, walking trees. I love that idea. Let's invent Ents. Or what's the famous character who says, I am not a man, when she rips off her helmet and slays the Nazgul, I believe. Is that correct? That comes straight out of Macbeth as well, right?
Yeah.
Macduff was of no woman born, from his mother's womb untimely ripped. So I say Gandalf is...
I'll take it.
the great grandson
That's
of Prospero.
that's a grasping point for me for
which
sure.
then that means he's basically the great grandson of John D.
Okay, there you go. Here's another tweet that we got in response to questions by someone again with a clear opinion. At Oxfraud is their Twitter handle.
Okay.
And they say lots of questions. For instance, what is your evidence that, and I'm going to butcher these names because, again, I'm not familiar. I apologize. Heminges and Condell were lying or mistaken when they named their fellow William Shakespeare as the author of the works.
You're talking about the two actors whose names were interlined into the will of Shakespeare of Stratford, that they got some money and some rings, and like that whole thing is so shady right off the bat. So there's obviously some sort of financial remuneration going on there. So what's the motivation? Well, that'd be a pretty good one.
But now he says though that they were lying or mistaken when they named William Shakespeare as the author. Are you saying that they received some compensation from people that were in charge of the will? I'm not following your thread.
It appears that they received some kind of remuneration for going along with the facade.
But
remember,
when would that have
naming
happened?
William Shakespeare as the author is not incorrect. That's like naming Mark Twain as the author of Pudd'nhead Wilson is not incorrect.
Right. Oh, okay. And so for the sake of context here, I'll play devil's advocate in this sense, and he means Shakespeare of Stratford upon Avon.
Right.
And now are you saying that they never did that?
No, they never did say it was specifically William Shakespeare of Stratford.
They said it was the author that's name is on the plays.
That's right.
And the works.
And in fact, if you look at the folio, and we've had several guests talk about the folio. We've had several guests talk about the Droschett engraving,
right?
The famous floating bald head,
right. Yes,
that is obviously a mask of some sort,
right?
And you look at Johnson's preface, introductory piece there, to the ever reader, all of that. It's so ambiguous. It's completely ambiguous. It never says, if you wanted to know this guy, go to Stratford and his house is located here.
Right.
And he was married to this lady and he had these children. Like there's nothing that is truly connective to the biography of that man at all, except for this name similarity.
Right. And that, to me, that single point is what turned me, is that sort of like I can't find anything in logic that would connect this person to the work of a writer, to a poet, to an artist, to somebody who understands the human condition. Based on the information that we do have of him, it sounds to me ridiculous.
Not even a grocery list,
right? I mean, if 600 years from now they're like, there was a man named Jake Lloyd and he was an incredible doctor and scientist, people would be like, wait a minute, hang on a second. Let's listen to these podcasts this guy's producing. Let's watch this movie this guy made. Trust me, this dude was not a scientist and or a doctor. Nothing connects his life to the life of a person that would do that sort of thing. And that's the same assessment that I have of this. Like, it's, to me, it's logic, and it's a reasonable doubt. I have a sister who's a lawyer, and I feel like I have not spoken with her about this, but I feel like if I did, the lawyer brain would kind of disallow.
Let's get her on the program.
I'm not opposed to it. Next time she's in LA, I'll make that happen. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, again, as somebody who is new to this, what I thought was interesting in that, like, even when people approach the Shakespeare authorship question for the first time, uninfluenced maybe even by a podcast like this, or a podcast that's pro Stratford.
I'm sure there must be some.
Sure. Podcasts that are pro? Oh, there are many.
But I don't know what they could talk about. There's one page of information on this guy.
But the point I'm trying to make here is, if you just Google this, if you just Google Shakespeare authorship question, I find it really interesting that even like the Wikipedia article, which I know Wikipedia is a user-generated information, so anybody can edit these. But I find that even these seem to be written with a bias. Like, every sentence in this sort of like throws a little shade. despite scholarly consensus, a relatively small but highly visible and diverse assortment of supporters, including prominent public figures, have questioned the conventional attribution. They work for acknowledgement of the authorship question as a legitimate field of scholarly inquiry and for acceptance of one another of the various authorship candidates.
Well, tell me the difference between legitimate inquiry and illegitimate inquiry.
It's true.
Isn't
Inquiry
anything
is
and everything worthy of inquiry?
We say it all the time. There's no such thing as a stupid question. People hear that all the time.
Okay, don't call me a conspiracy theorist. Don't start throwing your ad hominem attacks at me now, but even UFOs are worthy of inquiry. It's why we call them unidentified flying objects.
Also,
meaning we're not sure what that was. We need to look into it and figure it out.
And I think the problem is people hear UFOs and they think aliens, and that's not.
Exactly.
It's just
I saw something in the sky. I don't know what it was.
Right.
Can someone please investigate and tell me what it was?
Can we make sure some madman isn't creating some crazy weapon somewhere and it's flying in
or
my airspace?
Or was it just that egomaniac Elon Musk shooting off another rocket?
Maybe. Who knows? Here's another passage from that. It says, little is known of Shakespeare's personal life, and some anti-Stratfordians take this as a circumstantial evidence against his authorship. Further, the lack of biographical information has sometimes been taken as an indication of organized attempts by government officials to expunge all traces of Shakespeare from the historical record and to conceal the true author's identity. For example, a lack of attendance record for Stratford's grammar school is taken as suggesting that they may have been destroyed to hide proof that Shakespeare did not attend. What are your thoughts on this? Is this a thing that people think happened? Because this to me, and I'm going to play devil's advocate again, this to me sounds like the people who say conspiracy theory
the school thing
are just in saying that.
I can't speak for my fellow Oxfordians.
No, again, that's
but
the whole point of this.
I am so over the school thing.
Right? Okay.
Because there is so much evidence from other schools, other grammar schools of the time, in other locations in England.
Sure.
We have records of what a regular school day would have been for them. We also have records of what a regular school day was like for Edward de Vere.
Right.
Yeah. That's enough.
And the works that, from what I've learned on this show.
Even if Shakespeare did go to the Stratford Grammar School, there is no way whatsoever it included exposure to the type of language skills, reading and writing, and P.S. manuscripts, books, translations.
In different languages.
That we can prove were the source materials for the works of Shakespeare.
Right.
So the school thing is one of those really lame arguments that I think just doesn't hold any water anymore at all. And it's one of the ones that Stratfordians who haven't done any research into Shakespeare authorship at all constantly go to.
Right.
And one of the things that I think that is most difficult for authorship skeptics and for Oxfordians whenever we engage in a conversation with someone who is a Stratfordian is that we find that we know everything there is to know about their guy.
Right.
They know nothing about our guy. It would be like me trying to walk into the home of an astrophysicist and say, I'd like to have a conversation with you about some of the theories of astrophysics, except that I've never read any books on astrophysics other than Neil deGrasse Tyson's Astrophysics for Young People on the Move.
Right. Yeah.
Which is P.S. something my 5-year-old is reading right now.
Oh, wow. You have a smarter 5-year-old than I do. Wait, not that I do. I don't have a 5-year-old as far as I know. Anyways, so here's a question. So we're kind of coming to the end here of our time. How does the conversation become anything that is remotely productive? And furthermore, why is this conversation the type of conversation that one sees about politics or about religion? Again, and maybe this is because maybe I'm not passionate enough about the works. Maybe that's my approach to this. Is for me, it's not that big of a deal who the author is. And maybe that's something that's not a message that you would necessarily get behind.
In my opinion, the topics of politics and religion only have recently become as vitriolic as this topic has been for the last 100 years.
And so, all right. So with that said, that's a great point. Actually, I love that. And we talk about how, I'm seeing all this stuff happening on social media. And is it just a matter of the people who are having the conversation in unproductive ways are just the loudest, much like with politics.
You would have to
every
ask,
side of every argument.
We have a few very prominent psychologists, psychiatrists, professors of psychiatry and psychology as members of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship.
Right.
And quite honestly, I'd have to ask them why it is that people can be so horribly threatened
Right.
by this conversation.
Exactly.
Because truly, I don't understand why it is, but I have witnessed it. I've experienced it with close friends.
Right.
And have had some very heated arguments to the extreme point of me having to agree with them to never discuss it with them again.
Right. Right. And
which is sad.
It's not healthy.
It's really, really sad.
Right. It's like me with certain members of my family in politics or religion, where it's like, oh, this is not, we can't have this conversation because it's not.
Ultimately, what I seek to do now that this podcast series exists,
right.
it has become a new door for me to open for those people, because it's easier for them to listen to a few episodes
to become
of the
a voyeur,
podcast.
to become a voyeur versus a participant.
Right.
Right.
And it's a lot easier for them to listen than to read.
Right.
Unfortunately,
Absolutely.
a lot of people don't read.
I'm guilty of that. Like every year my thing is like, I got to read more books this year. Like, and every year I'm like, oh, next year will be the year, because
prior to this podcast being created and developed, I would do my best to encourage people to read a book, at least a book on this subject before engaging me in conversation with it again.
Right.
I would always say to them, it's difficult to have this conversation with you because I have this amount of knowledge about it,
right,
and you don't. That's not saying that you're stupid or ignorant. It's just saying that I have learned these things that you have not learned.
Sure.
And in essence, that is the crux of the whole thing, isn't it? Because our writer learned all these things.
Sure. Yeah.
That the guy from Stratford did not learn.
Right. Sure. And that is a great assessment of, of just the core belief, of the core doubt, I should say, not even belief. The core doubt is that's the perfect assessment.
Mark Anderson's book is one of my favorites. It's a big, thick volume. It's hard to get people to dive into that book. I think William Farina's book is a little easier, especially because it breaks it down by play.
Okay, that's interesting.
Literally play by play, not baseball.
I get it. Understood.
Yeah. And I think that's a little easier to just read one chapter at a time.
I also think that 100 Reasons is
100 Reasons is a great one.
When you guys were sitting down for that episode, I was skimming, and now I'm like, I want that book, and I'm like, oh, this is, to me, that was very easily digestible, because it's so singular. It's so like, oh, here's this topic right here. And I guess because the nature of how it started being like a blog, they're all one book, but they're really just a bunch of entries.
A lot of the best books, the book that started it all, the book that is going to be experiencing its 100th anniversary next year in 2020, the book by Thomas Loney. J. Thomas Loney wrote Shakespeare Identified, and it'll be 100 years ago.
Wow.
But that's a dense book. It's a very academic book. He's a school teacher. He wrote it.
And that is part of...
It's a tough sell.
That's part of my problem. And that's part of what I'm noticing. And that's why I mentioned earlier, I know I took a few shots at you academics. I apologize. I don't mean to call you nerds and antisocial. But that's part of like what I'm seeing as an outsider, as somebody who's interested in these things. And I've said multiple times to you, like, some of my favorite programs are programs that explore things that challenge things that are generally accepted. I really loved Penn and Teller's Bullshit, their Showtime show, super fun. And there's things on that show that they were wrong about, and they've admitted. And there's things on the show that I don't necessarily agree with, but the exploration is fantastic. I love Adam Ruins Everything, which is a fantastic show that pretty much just like pick a topic, and he's going to tell you everything that we currently know about said topic, whether you like it or not. The Shakespeare authorship question is just that. And so I think that people like me like really need to become aware of that this is a thing, because I think the conversation will be an easier conversation when the people who are arguably the most passionate about it move to the side and let the world figure it out in a way. I know that's a weird way to put it, but
there are a lot of people who have said it's going to take a lot of funerals for this to finally experience a paradigm shift.
That's unfortunate. That's terrible. And that's like, because we need to have the conversation with people who are alive. Like you were talking about with justice, like that's not how human communication works. And it drives me crazy because I tell you what, again, at Clear Shakes and the other people, the people who like throw this stuff out there, like this is my general, in closing, this is my thought on this is like, you love Shakespeare and I understand that. And regardless of whether I'm a Stratfordian or Oxfordian or Marlovian or whatever, what do people believe Bacon did it called? What are they called? Baconian? Oh, I like that one.
I suppose
put some of those on my salad.
You could be a Darbian.
Darbian, yeah, all of these things. No matter what you are, like you love this work, and challenging who wrote the work is a personal issue to you, and that's great. But to become angry, so angry that you are going to try to break down another person in a world and in a time where, I said it earlier, like kids are in cages at our borders. Like there are human atrocities that are happening in our world and in our culture right now that I really wish you took the anger for this mystery or for this opinion that you have, applied it to something where a person's life is going to be changed.
Like I said, I don't understand the psychology.
And instead approach this from an actual, like if you're really an academic, approach it from an academic standpoint, approach it from a scientific standpoint, also approach it from a human standpoint, because they're not mutually exclusive. People think that science and humanity are unrelated.
James Shapiro, I forget which university he teaches at, but he's been on record as actually threatening to fail students from his class if they bring this up in his class. Now, is that what our institutions of learning are supposed to be doing? Is stifling questions, shutting down inquiry, closing the minds of young people to exploration of truth? That blows my mind.
My head around that.
No, here, I don't want to reduce myself to his level, but when did your brain break?
Sure. Stephen, I love this conversation. I really do. I don't like the way that people handle themselves in this conversation. Well, and it's really interesting. And I think that is something that I would like as somebody who's on the outsides of this show, who's helping men in the ones and twos and making stuff sound nice and getting the episodes out, but not necessarily inspiring any of its words. That is what I want to leave the listeners of this show with, and you and the other participants of this show with. And that is like, the conversation is what we should be celebrating. This incredible person created these incredible works that inspired our lives and did that thing. And I wonder who that person was. And
Jake, it's no coincidence that the title of the podcast is "Don't Quill the Messenger."
It very much isn't.
We came up with that title for that very reason, because those of us on this side of this conversation do have to endure the slings and arrows of the other side on a constant basis. And I think that the question becomes then, is some people would say is, why does it matter so much to you? Right. So for a vitriolic Stratfordian, why does it matter so much to you to get so angry about it and so hateful and attack?
Right.
The converse question from an objective standpoint could be asked, why does it matter to an Oxfordian to defend it?
Right.
To endure those attacks, to not just go, you know what, I don't need this. I'm gonna go hide in a hole. It's not that important. And I believe that it comes down to this, and I can only speak for me.
Right, of course.
I see it as one of the greatest injustices in the history of mankind.
Okay.
This man poured his life in. It's his life's work. It is his true legacy, and it was stripped from him.
Right.
We're trying to figure out the exact reasons why, and we've got many pieces of the puzzle over the last 100 years that have come into play. We're missing some of those border pieces still, and that's why we can't fill in the middle.
You bought that puzzle at a garage sale, and it was missing a few pieces. You didn't realize it until you got the whole thing home, and you're like, damn it.
And quite honestly, a bunch of the pieces have been chewed by somebody's dog.
Right. Sure.
I kind of like that analogy.
That's good.
And so for us, I think, and especially for me as this, passionate artist,
right,
it's about righting a wrong.
Right. Yes.
it's about giving him what he's due. It's about recognizing his soul.
Right. And I think that to me, that is like the science element of me, is like just knowing truth is how we learn and we grow. And accepting a non-truth, or just not being willing to challenge a truth that you know is not healthy.
And all we're doing is asking questions.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much. This is a fun conversation. I do hope that people are enjoying the show, and I hope that that we can start expanding this reach and getting more people
Please
included
continue
in this
to write, for good or for bad. You might hear yourself on the air in a future episode when we go into setting the record straight or just dealing with listener feedback. So you can, as Jake mentioned at the top of the show, you can send us a message. You just click right on the upper right-hand corner and send us a message. Tell us what you think. Give us a rate and review. Be sure you're listening to all of our other episodes. A lot of your questions will be answered there, but if they're not, send us a note. We'd love to respond because that's what we're all about, right? Thank you for joining us on Don't Quill the Messenger. Please be sure to visit the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website. It is your source and resource for all the answers about the Shakespeare authorship question and Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. And as always, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.